Hey, book lovers. It is Black History Month. I know that's right, okay? And I'm already excited to talk about my first read of the month, all right? So, this is The Trembling Hand, Reflections of a Black Woman in the Romantic Archive. And sorry if I mispronounced this author's name. Please correct me as always. It is Mathelinda Nabugodi. All right. Y'all see it? Y'all see it? I need y'all to read this. I need you to read it, especially if you're someone who is you love literature. If you I've already recommended this to some of my friends who like teach English or taught English, so I'm pick it up. But I wanted to share, I have some things selected here that I want to share with you guys that really, and mind you, this is only in the first like 102 pages of the book. All right, that I was like, whoa. I took a lot of notes in this book. I was annotating, y'all. So give me, so I want to do that more this year. Get back into it. I annotated, but I only marked these sections because I want to focus on these sections for this video. And I hope that hearing the thoughts of this author, spark your desire to pick this book up. Okay. Now I did get this as a gifted copy, so I'm really, really grateful. Shout out to Na for that. But yeah, first and foremost, what is the book even about? You're like, Brie, what are you talking about? What's the book about? As described, it says it's a provocative, revelatory history of British Romanticism that examines the impact of the transatlantic slave economy on the lives and times of some of our most beloved poets with urgent lessons for today. That's a quick little description. There's a whole like side thing right there, a whole, panel. But in short, the author is going through archives of famed romantics and emphasizing in a lot of ways, what we deem to be important and who has the power to be deemed important. And archives being something that is, noted, given attention to, saved, it has to be deemed valuable enough to do so. And that the reason those archives, these items that she selected are valuable is because of who touched them, who held them, who used them at one point. And how we have given space to archive these items and seen power in this, but erase the story of some of these items that really needs to be discussed. And the cost of what it is to still hold these items here without really looking into them. So I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed her approach with going about it. I enjoyed her breakdown of her life, as she is someone who loves, this is a period that she loves. These are authors and poets that she loves, but having to fall out of love in a way and reevaluate how she, as an appreciator of the romantics, sees their work and acknowledging that it's crazy. And this is why I also want to talk about this, because this connects to today very much so. And the deep realization that it's going to be hard for you to fall out of love with your idols. We're seeing that right now, where a lot of people are having to readjust the idea of celebrity and who they give fame to and who they give attention and who, where they put their dollar at. And I think there'll be a time when people look back today and say the same thing and say, oh, hmm, I really love this person, but all these things were going on and their music didn't display that. Their writing didn't display that. Their poetry never displayed that. So I really appreciate that as well for this. And she is talking from the space of growing up in Sweden, coming into her own Black identity, her own Black womanhood. And so there's a lot of things to be said and appreciated about this read. Now, diving into it, first and foremost, I want to say she does choose certain people to follow. There's only, I think, 5 or 6. It's a scrap of Coleridge's handwriting, the sugar that Wordsworth stirred into his teacup, a bracelet made of Mary Shelley's hair. And yeah, she getting to Mary Shelley too. I'm gonna read her other book. And then she says, Percy Shelley's golden baby rattle, the desk mask preserving Keats' calm face, and Byron's silk-lined leather boot. Okay, so those are the poets she chose, authors she chose, and the items that she chose. And she's going in and seeing these items. She's literally going in, putting her hands on these items, and she deeply talks about the feel, the of not just the feel in her hands, but the feel it has on her to be that close to someone that she admired, and also having to again unravel the other truths behind each item. So one thing that first jumped out at me, again, when the first 100 or 102 pages, right? She talks about how in simple, the romanticism coincided with the culmination of the transatlantic slave trade and its abolition. So how intricately racial capitalism was woven into the fabric of British culture in the decades when the romantics composed their greatest works, right? So like today, all these things that are going on, someone will look back and say, like I said, that this was going on when all this was going on, when all these great songs were being put out. Why aren't we hearing about it? And why aren't we, it's great to listen. You're like, wait a second, wasn't that when? So I love that. And it made me just think about again today and how people are gonna look back at our history, our romantic period, our our arts and artists, and it says it's important to recover the material links between romantic poets and slave-made prophets, but the effects of chattel slavery went far beyond money. She also mentions Claudia Rankine and Beth Lafreda they use the term racial imaginary to describe how writers are affected by living in a structural racist society, and that this book and her aim of this book is to trace the racial imaginary of romanticism, not only how romantic writers directly or indirectly benefited from the profits of enslavement, because they did benefit, but more importantly, how the existence of racial slavery infested their creative imaginations. And again, highlighting the fact that these people had to move in the same circles. It was a privilege to create art. It still is a privilege to create art. And that's not to say that someone who's poor can't create art. Of course you can. But when you look at the fact that to have your art celebrated, to have your art be spread, takes privilege, it takes access, it takes money to do to do those things. And recognizing that the same people who in a time period preached about freedom and liberty were sitting along the same circles of slaveholders. Yeah, we're seeing that again today as well. um, the next thing that kind of jumped out at me, and these things are kind of all connected. She talks about the importance of the word Sankofa, and says Sankofa is a Twi word that can be translated as "go back and get it," an invitation to return for which has been forgotten, an acknowledgement that we need to learn from the past as we go forward into the future. The concept of Sankofa has traveled within with the diaspora and is sometimes evoked by the descendants of people displaced by the transatlantic slave trade, um, and enslaved persons with when they wish to recall their origins. Looking at records of chattel slavery and related racist vitriol is overwhelming. And she says, a day at the library can leave me in despair. And I felt that so deeply because she talks about how, yeah, I could just study anything. She said I could just look at these items, these things, these little tokens, and be appreciative of being connected to them, and only look at it from the romantic standpoint. But here she is picking up, and that's how I feel every time I go to the library and I'm picking up nonfiction books. I'm picking up stories and things that told across the diaspora, told by enslaved people. The stories that we do have access to, right? Because there's probably so many that we don't. But that feeling that you say, yes, it's tough to read this, but I have to read it. I have to go back and get this information. She says, then I think of Sankofa, and there is something that I need to go back and get out of this archive, or rather, someone. So, the people that she's looking for in the stories that aren't being told, I just pulled this tab out. I just lost that spot. That aren't being told, that are deserving to be told. So and we see that deeply in this book, as she, is looking deeper, and she is analyzing poetry. There's multiple, very well researched book. I mean, the research eats. She did her big one with that. She kind of touches on, not really quickly, but I will say touches on this woman that really stuck out to me, as well, where she says, romantic era accounts of Black rebellion to present day zombie films. Oh, I literally put a note. I said I need to deep dive into this topic. So don't be surprised if sometime in the next few months you see me come back with that report, because that line stuck with me. She talks about like the voodoo and medicinal thought process of why people would even think that was something that was happening, people being brought back to life. But how it more so taps into people's fear of rebellion, at that time, specifically of those enslaved and those captors and people who were holding these people, prisoner, who were harming these people, and their deep fear of that spirit coming back to life, that person that they had taken the life from in every form, coming back to life to harm them and attack them, and how Coleridge kind of taps into that with some of his work as well. What the next thing that, again, that was like, I'm telling you, there's so much, and we're not even that deep into the book. Is when she's talking about Coleridge, and she's like, I need to address how he went from being this enthusiastic abolitionist to becoming a white supremacist. Now, the reason I mark this is because, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's hard for people to fall out of love with their idols, or how they have seen them, or what we've been told about them. But this is something, again, that still happens today, where we have to recognize there's a very thin line. Okay, there's a thin line between what it is and what it can be, what it is and what it means to be an abolitionist, or someone who is an ally, or someone who is pro this, and someone who isn't. And that line of white supremacy exists, and you may be thinking, well, no, it's very clear, you're on this side. But quite truthfully, an example I can give is even recently when talking and having discussions about ICE and some of these places where they're building ICE warehouses. You may have people at the same meeting who are saying, I don't want this warehouse to come to my neighborhood. I don't want ICE to be in the streets. I don't want them to be here. But why? And that purpose matters. So, like she kind of talks about here, it's very easy to see how this man transitioned his way of thinking and from being very pro, abolition, and then how that thinking also started to become and shift and supported by white supremacist ideas. So yeah, if you're coming into a meeting and you're saying, yeah, I don't want ICE here because I think that it's going to bring the people they're going to be, picking up are criminals, and I don't want criminals. That's a different reason as someone like myself who will say, no, I don't want ICE anywhere because nobody should be snatched up. Everybody's human. Everybody deserves to be respected. Everybody here has rights. We have different reasons why we're at the same meeting, though we agree with the same purpose, right? We don't want them here. But that reason matters. And I love that. Reading this at the same time that I've been going to and doing some things really made me think about that deeply, how there's that thin line of separation. While we may have a shared goal of doing this, why are we, and how I can't align myself with you just because we have the shared goal, because your reason for that shared goal is not the same as mine. So she talks about how she really had a hard time separating Coleridge and from his work, and how she really can't, how it's necessary to be discussed. And I love that she uses huge influences of her work to guide her through this journey of talking about it. And here she's using Nina Simone as her guide. But she says, most romanticists, even those who have published entire books on Coleridge, have quietly turned away from his racist little pyramid. There's a pyramid here that he made about how he feels about where people are structured. So he goes from being pro-abolitionist to being having this idea of the white race being the superior race, and therefore the reason we should have abolition is because the superior race has to obviously help the lower races. And it's like you go from this to now this kind of thinking. And she emphasizes that he went to school, he followed certain teachings, and those teachings went from taking his art, something that had a lot more of a moral component to it, to something that was deeply influenced by the racial science at that time. And the reason, again, this largely stuck out to me was not, I even highlighted here, like, I want to look more into that scientist that she mentioned. His name is Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, because he also was noted to be a famed abolitionist of that time. But it's what she talks about here makes me really reemphasize the importance and understanding the fact that misinformation can sometimes outlast the truth, right? Misinformation, when it's the loudest voice in the room, when it's picked up by a certain ear and is incorporated into other works, will be the thing that lasts longer, which is here she talks about Blumenbach's, even his choice in using the term Caucasian for his original race, in part because some sources identify the Caucasus as the region where the Garden of Eden was located, right? So this idea of being close to the Garden of Eden, close to life and livelihood and all that is rich and all that is powerful, and associating that with Europeans. And then she says, this man did not let the geographical distance between Northern Europe and the Caucasus regions get in the way of his conclusions. And one would think that this alone would be enough to disprove his theory. But still today, the fact that white people are referred to as Caucasians in the US today is a testament to Blumenbach's lasting influence on conceptions of race. We still reference Caucasian people as this because of this level of misinformation. And so this level of misinformation and this level of just kind of disregarding certain truths has affected the writing and romantics of that time. So she says, it's hardly surprising that Blumenbach's theories were weaponized by the defenders of slavery. Yet he himself was an outspoken abolitionist. He went through pains to identify that, no, Africans are smart. They're smart people too, by collecting books by Black authors, studies done by Black people. And she notes here, but at the same time had those books on the shelf right next to his human skulls. Right? And she says how this then affected Coleridge, and he then begins to write things. Now, this is going to sound asinine and absurd. She mentions, like, this man clearly was not, wasn't there. And you have to think about the artists that we love and the classes that we celebrate, but look at the mind of that person. And she talks about here how Coleridge started to write about how he had this view. He wanted to get more into African and racial sciences and less away from, again, that moral component. And he says how their wounds will become white. Coleridge writes, assuming that scars look white on black skin in the same way that they do on white skin. But this is nonsense. And this is not the, and she says this is not the only nonsense in his note. He goes on to claim in that black people consider such white scars as a grand progression in their rank of nature, spite of their abhorrence of the cruelty of white men. So he is claiming that black people welcome being whipped because their wounds will turn into white scars and bring them closer to the ranks of white Europeans. This is that was being written and celebrated, and even while this was in his separate notes, his work was being celebrated, which means people who celebrate that work go into his look in his notes and are inspired by his thinking, as he was inspired and twisted some of the thinking of someone else as well. This is what still exists today when we see this, and the reason why I marked this page is because look at how we talk about the medical field as well right now, when you have stories and stories and stories of black women, black men, black people coming out and talking about their treatment in these facilities, and it traces back to the racial science of that time and how black people don't experience pain the same way. And now we're saying not only do they not experience pain the same way, but they look for the pain because of the scars and how it changes the color of their skin and needing this proximity to whiteness, right? Okay, so like I said, we're not, mind you, I'm not even marking all the things that I had that I had highlighted and noted and things of that nature, because there's so much to be said. Now this is something that was like the biggest thing to me. To kind of take it quickly, she says, all agreed that the transatlantic slave economy devoured human flesh. The taste of sugar was a taste of black blood. So she is connecting this to the fact that plantations were brutal, not only because it wasn't just a lethal place because of the suffering at the hands of at the hands of these deeply tormented people, but also the conditions it was to work at these places, to work at these mills, to work at these plantations was extremely dangerous and deadly work. And how she is sitting there with Wordsworth's teacup. And it says, Wordsworth may have well stirred some of the sugar whose production is described in letters to Perrin, or in letters just like them written to another absentee planters, into his tea. His teacup and the plantation papers are not just randomly connected by the coincidence of her seeing them on the same day. In fact, they are two relics of the same history. While I have been drawn to the cup by the thought that Wordsworth had once drunk from it, it is actually part of a much larger story about how foreign delicacies such as tea, sugar, coffee, and hot chocolate entered British mouths. She said, in a course of a few centuries, these products went from luxuries for the rich to everyday necessities for working class. So now you have something that was, again, a staple. Sugar was used in so many different ways. You can see it in shows like Bridgerton. The way that sugar is displayed and having these huge displays of candies and cookies and baked goods and confectionaries was literally a sign of wealth and access. But where's that sugar coming from? And when you see these crowds of people eating it, consuming it, and how there was people at that time who said you are eating black blood, because there is no way that you are consuming that sugar, that some of that sugar didn't have the black body in it. And it has obviously the black body in it from the fact that it was made by enslaved people, but the black body in the fact that these were dangerous places and their blood was in this product and you are eating it. It says, such sugar reached England in very small quantities in the beginning, early on, being so expensive that it was barely even eaten. Instead, it was used as medicinal electuary. In one recipe, sugar was mixed with ground pearls and diamonds as a cure for bad eyes. Of course, only the very richest people could afford such medicines. I'm like, sounds familiar to today, where access to healthcare is what it is. And she says, it's also interesting to note that neither tea nor coffee nor chocolate had been sweetened in their original cultural context. It was Europeans who needed a sugar hit to soften the bitterness of these foreign beverages. The reason this really jumped out at me, and I'm happy to end on this kind of like, whoa, like this moment. Like I said, this is page 99, 98, 99, 100, and 102, where she is talking about how in their original form, this is not what it was used for. They had to sweeten it because of how it was brought to them. They said, I need a little sweeter. And it made me think so deeply about, as a lover of sweet tea, it made me literally sit here and say, like, I need to stop drinking this shit. I need to remove sweet tea or remove certain things from my diet. And it made me think very, very deeply about the black body in connection to conversations around diabetes. And I remember growing up and people talking about, oh, you got the sugar blood, you got that sweet blood. And I don't have diabetes, but a lot of people in my family do. and how we have this relationship with something that was introduced to us through colonialism, through, oh my gosh. It really, like, that hit me like a rock, right? So the same way that she's processing certain things and she's having to fall off her love and relationship with certain romantics and certain authors and poets, I'm sitting here thinking about how we talk about, high fructose corn syrup and red dye, and the introduction of certain things in urban areas, in low funded areas all throughout the US, and how that intentional that is. How now we have a relationship with sugar that is so unhealthy. Um, and our body is telling us it's not meant for us to be consumed this way, but we've been consuming it this way because of the people who oppressed us. And we still do, because to this day. Like, that's something that to me is a lasting effect that I don't think people may always make the connection to. If you already made that in your life, I'm proud of you, because I read that, and as someone who's read a lot of things, I feel like that just, it really shook me to and made me think very, very, very deeply. So she says the high prices fetched for imported luxuries created a financial incentive for establishing overseas colonies, places with a favorable climate to grow exotic produce. As planters sought to identify the most profitable way of extracting value from the land, ecologically diverse, ancient tropical forests were cleared to establish plantations producing a single crop. This monoculture was a disaster for the environment, and it led to the explosion in production, which in turn led to increased imports over time and lower prices. So now, as prices fell, sugar migrated down the social hierarchy, so that by the middle of the 18th century, it had become a daily necessity in any respectable English household. A century later, sugar was a staple in even the poorest person's diet. A tea break, including a cup of tea with milk and sugar, provided the calorie boost needed to get a British factory worker or miner through the day. So this thing that was this hard to get expensive item has now been made an everyday piece of everyone's household. Like I just see, even today, right? It still carries on today. And there has to be a need for someone for that that need to be there. That means production has to be there, which means you're not only you're you need more people to produce it, more people taken from their land, taken from their homeland, and forced to do this labor. You're talking about the destruction of natural places that were meant and used to produce a multitude of things now being destroyed to produce one thing. And again, the lasting effects of that in our history today. She said, this means that Caribbean sugar production depended on enslaved African labor, and the two, white sugar and black bodies, became intertwined in the public imagination. This association was weaponized by the abolitionist movement. In addition to convincing people of the moral wrongs of enslavement, abolitionists pioneered the use of consumer boycotts as a tool of political activism. They wanted to strike at the profitability of the slave economy by making people abstain from sugar and rum, which were the two most important slave-produced imports from the West Indies. To end this campaign, campaigners forged an equivalence between taking sugar and drinking human blood. A part of the food amongst most of you is sweetened with the blood of the murdered. Coleridge railed this. Coleridge himself railed in his slave trade lecture of 1795. He denounced. He said his denunciation of sweet things as the food of cannibals was firmly in line with contemporary abolitionist talking points. Again, the same man who not long ago said what he said is now saying this. And you see that thin line of how people today, they say this, but then they also say this. It's like, where are you really? And how not as some you have those people that we celebrate who aren't really fully on board with what we're thinking. They may say the right things at times. Broken clock can be right twice a day, but they also have this line of thinking too. And until they fully process this, we really can't celebrate them here as well. We have to look at them fully. She says Benjamin Flower, one of Coleridge Cambridge associates, ridiculed refined ladies who sweeten their tea and the tea of their families and visitors with the blood of their fellow creatures. And William Fox carefully calculated that every pound of sugar was equivalent to 2 ounces of human flesh. This metaphor also entered visual culture in a satirical print. And I'm going to find this print because it makes, not necessarily makes light, but it's satirical of how there's like a giant teacup. It's described, the image is described, but essentially they're talking about how when you're drinking this tea, as much tea as y'all are drinking the black body. It says the drowning Africans melt in the image. The drowning African melts into this huge cauldron of boiling sugar juice. He or she passes invisibly but materially into the substance of refined white sugar, which then circulates around the tea tables of the West. The violence of the plantation was such that the blood inevitably got mixed up with the sugarcane juice. Okay, y'all hear me? If you're still here, you got to really be listening. All right. And it says, from the African perspective, the transatlantic slave trade, or the translated trade in enslaved persons, swallowed large masses of people who never returned, even as the white man came back again and again, always hungry for more. And they talked about how this sparked a fear of cannibalism, which we'll get into in another book, because I have some books I'm reading this month that I'm doing for read along that talk about human consumption of the black body. So that's that. And it says this was a real thing for cause of insurrection and fear. People literally feared being eaten. They feared being eaten, and they have reports from people who worked on these ships talking about how they're trying to convince them, we're just gonna go put you to work, okay? We're not gonna eat you, but you are. There's no way around it. You're consuming the black body, even if you are actually performing cannibalism, you are consuming the black body through its labor, its sweat equity. You're literally you are consuming the black body in a way that you don't even recognize, and are normalizing to make everybody complicit in that action. So yeah. And this obviously just connects back to how we then start to change the definition of what it is to have taste, and says taste. It's funny that we use the same word taste to speak about how something tastes in the mouth, on our tongues, and to describe our ability to evaluate artistic work. A dish might taste good to you, but good taste is a learned skill that indicates your degree of cultivation, elegance, and refinement. And so now, and I'm gonna end it on that note, because she's talking about the power of being in a position to define what taste is. To say this is taste, it's tasteful to have sugar in your tea. It's tasteful to do this. It's tasteful to look this way and dress this way, um, at the expense of the black body, at the expense of enslaved people. So I share that with you. This is almost a 30-minute video. I don't even know if Instagram will let me load it onto here, but if they do, I hope you listen to the whole thing. And I really hope that inspires you to go and pick up the Trembling Hand, because wow, this was my first read of February, and it was a 5-star read for me. So this was a great way to kick off my Black History Month. I hope you guys enjoy. I really look forward to hearing more and seeing more Black History Month posts, and posts throughout the whole year that continue to inspire me and remind me why I read as Black as I do. I read the nonfiction I do, and just continue to inform me and remind me just how we got to where we are, and why we're in the situation we're in, and how much more information there is out there to learn, receive, and go back and bring forth.